Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome back to Battlefleet Gothic. So, continuing along where we left off, we've got the Tau. Now, again, I have been sick for a little while, and I have never actually been too interested in leveling the Tau back up to 8 after all my accounts got wiped. I've leveled up everybody else to 8. The Tau was the one that I just could not actually be bothered to do, because they're kind of one-dimensional and boring. For me, but I know that there's going to be a lot of people that actually do like them because they're direct, they're effective, they're powerful, and they win, they're effective, they're good. But let's talk about what makes them good. So we are only level 7 with this, we're pretty damn close, but this will be good enough for demonstration purposes. All we're really missing is the Custodian, and the Custodian is not a ship that I often actually take with the Tau because you don't need it. Don't get me wrong though, if you're up against a Custodian, it is extremely powerful. It just doesn't fit my playstyle as well as other types of ships do. So, one of the things to note about the Tau and why you're probably losing against them, excuse me, it's a little bit like the Orcs. They're a very effective faction when they've got some levels under their belt and when they've got some ranks and abilities. In particular, favors for the Tau, just like with the Orcs, are extremely meaningful and powerful by contrast to a lot of other people's. So we can take a quick look at these. If you're going for a full carrier fleet with the Tau, you can actually make an interesting build using the Firecast, using the Breacher teams and the XB-78 battle suits. The reason being that if you've got this combination, 46 Vanguard Void battle suits, when you've got this combination, you do a boarding action when you're using your carrier runs. So if you've got something like the Protector Talku here, with its lovely 2 launch bays, that actually not only does 2 additional crit chances, it also gives you 2 automatic fires even if you fail on the crit chance. This is a fleet that actually absolutely does love the Custodian because the Custodian is a much better carrier than the Talku, especially when you consider for cost. You could argue that you would want the Sacia, a different type of ship rather than the Sacia, but honestly the other ships in this tier are still pretty crap. Next up is the Watercast. They did nerf the Nixar Dao summons, so that's now every 240 seconds instead of every 180 seconds. This isn't meaningful enough to actually stop it from being an extremely good upgrade, and the ability to just spam out Nixar Daos is something that has cost many people an undeserved victory, basically. The Diplomat is actually also very good for Tau warships, because quite often they benefit tremendously from having lots of crew. The Corvette is very good for those carrier-type ships. The technical drones are obviously good. Fire warriors can help a little bit, but are usually not too necessary. They're still pretty good, though. The marker drones are extremely good. The Earthcast engineers are quite good for Tau ships, the reason being that lower hit points means that healing and repairs is more vital. Aircast obviously doesn't matter that much, and Envrod obviously doesn't matter that much. But still, the ability to get more crew for Tau, because you've got 5 things that are pretty good, to very good for them, and 4 things that I would say are extremely good for them, which normally you can only get 3. This would let you get a lot more. The other thing about the Tau is that they've got extremely powerful upgrades. Right, I was talking about favors. I'm sort of cutting ahead of myself here. Earthcast, also extremely powerful. The upgrades are extremely good. That was what I was sort of going to segue into, but I mucked up my segue, like the scrub that I am. Experimental Railgun is also extremely powerful. Since it goes straight through the shields and ignores it, you can deal direct hull damage even to very tough tanky ships that are using shields. And since it also penetrates through armor, it's great for going through the prow of ships. If you've got enough small ships that all have these lance, this sort of volley from these, you can actually shred a ship down to nothing or next to nothing without even coming in contact with them. And then that torpedo volley hits, and that first volley of macro fire or whatever hits, and then those bombers hit, and you've actually destroyed like a cruiser tier ship without even really doing anything. And being in a fight with 1 less cruiser is a huge deal in this game. And then of course the upgrades are extremely good for the Tau. Aircast is the only one that's not super meaningful. The bonuses are strictly speaking good, but I do not actually think that they're the ones that are super good for the Tau. I think that these would actually be better on something like Chaos. If like this was a Chaos upgrade, it would be broken. It would be absolutely broken. If it was on Eldar, it would be absolutely broken if they could somehow have evasive maneuvers while they were just at a certain speed or something like that. It would just be way too powerful. The next thing though is the upgrades, and this is what also makes Earthcast so good, but also what Tau in general. So the first one, Adaptive Deflector, giving your front shield 75% armor, is basically the equivalent of quadrupling the shield strength against all weapons, or against macro weapons, but against stuff that ignores armor, it actually increases the armor of the shields, because normally if you're getting hit in the front by a lance, that lance does 100% damage against your shield. Now if you're getting hit in the front by a lance, that actually has a 25% chance of not bypassing the armor. So this is an incredibly powerful ability. Makes your ships extremely durable from the front. In fact, it's the reason that you don't want to get into a slugging match with the front of the Tau ships. Going front against them with just about anything other than maybe Eldar is suicidal. They're actually possibly going to lose against orcs if you're getting hit by enough torpedoes, but that's only because orc ships cost a lot less than yours. Other upgrades that are quite noticeable that people take are the stealth alloy. I don't actually find that that's too important. The other is focusing on the seeker missile upgrades, marker lights, and extra turrets. If you've got that combination, you're actually able to not only swat down a lot of torpedoes, which is a kind of weakness for the Tau up until they get enough carrier mass, but having all those interlocking areas of fire from those upgraded seeker missiles is also going to deal a huge amount of damage to any ships that come into close range, which is where you would expect the Tau to be a little bit weaker, but in actual fact, if they've gone for this route, they're extremely powerful at that range. They've also got good carrier upgrades, but they are missing the most vital of carrier upgrades, and that is that they can't actually launch fighters faster than normal. But if they have the energy shields, the fact that Tau fighters can sustain additional damage before destruction, and taking the XV-46 Vanguard Void battlesuits, their bomber waves become quite deadly, even though they come out less often. Now, there is a trick to defeating Tau carrier fleets that revolves around them not being able to reload their fighters as often, but we'll get into that just a little bit later. So, when you're playing against the Tau, it's hard to tell exactly what their weakness is going to be, just because the way that they play is going to be dictated a little bit by their favors and their upgrades, which you aren't going to necessarily know until you get close range to that fleet. The other basic characteristics of the Tau fleets, though, are also very tricky. So, if we look at this Tau ship over here, it's got 75 front armor, it's got 50 side armor, and it's got 50 rear armor. So you're obviously going to want to fire at it from the side or from the rear. From the front, these things are an absolute nightmare. All of its firepower is directed straight forward. It's capable of firing everything forward. And the problem with this game is that it allows very easy rotation to the sides, and if you're stationary, you can still keep rotating. If you're playing the tabletop game, this ship would be forced to move forward quite a bit, and then it would do a slow turn. It's quite often possible for you to actually maneuver such that you're over on this part of the ship by doing an all-ahead full to get beside it, get off your broadside, have it be forced to move forward, and then do a slow turn and end up sort of with you sort of behind them completely. You do a turn, and now suddenly you're on their 6. That is something that happens quite often to a ship like this in the tabletop, and that would force them to burn their special orders instead of on brace for impact or anything like that on something like burn retros, allowing them to turn on the spot. And all that would do is keep you on their side for another turn, rather than putting you in their front arc. Now, they are capable of firing to the side, but their fire to the side is not anywhere near as devastating as if you're facing down all of their guns simultaneously from the front. So there's a slight imbalance in the way that they were implemented in this game, in my opinion, when they were translated over from the tabletop, but that's okay, because there's a lot of things that didn't translate over to the tabletop from the tabletop that would have made them more effective against the Tau as well. So, for example, Eldar are a bit of a nightmare for Tau to deal with, just because they can basically just stay on their 6 the entire game while dumping ordnance into their rear end, and pulsars are just absolutely going to shred these guys. But it doesn't really work that way in this, but at the same time, these guys also have much weaker weapons than they do on the tabletop, and their ordnance values are not quite as scary as they were on the tabletop, so it's hard to say. Either way, though, the moral of the story is these guys from the front arc are absolutely devastating. So what can you sort of do about that? Well, if you're, say, up against a Sissia, you're a new player, you're up against another new player Tau, you can try to get around the sides, but he's just going to rotate to follow you. This means that typically when you're up against the Tau, what you want to do is take one enemy ship. So let's say that I'm up against the Sissia. I want to take this one single ship here, and I want to maneuver my Dauntless so that I've got one facing the front of it, using its prow lance or its prow torpedoes, against this one Sissia. Both of its Sissias can be focus firing me. That's fine, or whatever. It means that I'm firing from the front at one ship, and I'm firing broadside at another potentially, but fundamentally the more important thing is I'm firing all of my shots to the front of this ship with one ship, going front with it, using that powerful lance. If I'm Chaos, I go broadside to front because the Chaos ships have slightly better broadside characteristics thanks to their turrets and their lances and not having a front-firing weapon. If I'm Eldar, of course, you use hit-and-run tactics. If I'm Orcs, again, you're probably going to have to use whichever weapon is your strongest, hitting the front of the ship using that Orc ship, probably your torpedoes. And while that's happening, you get your other ship and you maneuver it around this same ship so that you're guaranteed to have one ship flanking. So with someone like the Imperial Navy, he's probably actually going to try and go broadside to broadside with you 90% of the time, unless they're a player that really knows what they're doing and they're using a Dauntless and they're firing front. Because as I mentioned before, the Dauntless is actually more deadly, firing its front weaponry at just about anything out there. With the Tau, it's different. They will simply stay 6,000 range and they will right-click you, and their ship will automatically turn so it is always front-facing. It can only do that with one target. So that second ship that flies around its back, you'll have that one maneuvering. It'll be firing into the rear of these guys. They're fragile ships with only 400 hull integrity, and if you're firing at them with everything you've got, one ship at the front with brace for impact, another one getting around behind it with perhaps the guns trained on it, although don't necessarily want to do that because it might just spin around and suddenly you've got it reversed. But yeah, it ultimately means that you'll have these guys surrounded, and once you've done that, you can even actually ram it from both directions. It can't turn to face the rammer, and it can't boost away from them because it'll hit the guy that's in front of it directly, and then that other guy's going to come in from behind and sandwich it, and that's going to basically deal like 200, 300 damage to this little guy here. Even though its front armor is quite good and it's not going to take that much damage from the front ram, that rear ram is absolutely going to wreck this guy. So just focus down one of their ships at a time and you'll be fine. And this gets into one of their other real strengths, and that is their repair ability. Repair drones are absolutely crazy. Every 3 minutes or so for a completely unupgraded ship, much faster if you've got faster special orders due to technical drones, you're going to be able to heal 90 hit points on all the ships in a radius. So if you've got all your ships clumped together as the Tau, you can keep them all clumped together and have them all sort of wanking off each other with these repair drones, meaning that you can actually repair something like every 1 point every second for an entire match, or even more than that. I mean, at the most extreme, you could be healing 3 hit points per second for every ship for the entire match, if you're cycling through them properly and you've got enough ships. Obviously, this is absolutely crazy. Well, I think it's actually more like a 2 points every second. Actually, no, because you've got your own repairs. So each of these ships can just absolutely take way more hit points than you think they can. But that's only if they survive long enough to go through these technical drones and these repair drones and their Earthcast. If they get burst down by someone coming in, ramming them from behind, ramming them from the front, dealing damage from behind, dealing torpedo shots to the front, all at the same time, they're not going to be able to do that. Whereas if you sort of hit them with some torpedoes, and you sort of hit them with some guns, and you sort of hit them with some rear fire, and you do this all across a long attrition battle, they're going to be able to heal up very, very effectively. And a lot of newer players against a new Tau fleet could still end up losing a worn-down attrition fight because they're not willing to take the risk to really hit these guys hard and sacrifice their ships to take them out quickly. And that is ultimately what you really need to focus on doing to these guys, is take them out quickly at any cost. Even if you have to ram your ships that are damaged into these guys, you can't get into a hit-and-run war against these guys unless you're playing as the Eldar. Even if you're playing as Chaos, I would not recommend going for a hit-and-run style against these guys, because those bombers that you get a wave of bombers in on one of these guys, and suddenly they're full health again by the time you get another bomber wave. And, it's going to be hard to keep your bomber waves alive even through all that turret fire that typical Tau fleet's going to have, all those fighters that they're typically going to have. So focus these ships down one at a time, make absolute certain that they're dead. Once they are, that's repair drones that are gone, that's firepower that's gone, and it's going to make it easier for you to surround the remaining ships and pound them from multiple sides, from the sides and from the rear, and keep them busy from the front so that they're forced to look at you or what have you. The next thing to talk about is the Tau's ordnance. Now, obviously the Tau have homing torpedoes. This is a good thing and it's a bad thing. It means that if they are blind to you, that means that you're playing as red dots against them. They cannot fire torpedoes against you at all. This is a huge disadvantage compared to something like if you're playing against orcs who are just flinging torpedoes and shit across the map in huge numbers. That's obviously stronger than being able to fire no torpedoes at all. But at the same time, once they've got vision of the ship, that ship is basically marked for death because it will be getting swarmed by torpedoes until it dies. and this can force a person to do a lot of evasive maneuvers to keep that ship alive, or can force you to waste your special orders on going stealth just to avoid getting some torpedo hits. But there are some interesting factors to these torpedoes. For one, unlike other torpedoes, they are not armor-piercing, which is a very interesting trait of Tau torpedoes. But this means that if you're playing as someone who's got a 75 armor prow, such as the Orcs or the Imperium, what you're best off doing is actually just face-tanking those missiles. If you're the Space Marines, you could potentially shrug them off if you're closing the distance fast enough as well. And you could even do it while braced for impact if you've got the setup where you can basically be braced for impact almost all the time. If you can manage this, then you're not going to really take much damage or any damage at all from these torpedo volleys, and that can be quite a useful tip to know about them. But if worse comes to worse, you could always use stealth maneuvers to keep yourself out of the line of sight so that they cannot launch torpedoes against you at all. This is easiest, obviously, for a faction like Chaos and Eldar, who can easily dodge probes and who can use special orders quite often with the fleet compositions that Chaos likes to use. They're quite good at using special orders without being seen. But if you're playing as Orcs or you're playing as the Imperium, who are more likely to get hit by a recon beacon or an auger probe, they can actually just face tank these torpedoes, and don't be afraid of them. Don't turn away from them. Don't turn your side to them, because a lot of people try and get away from these torpedoes, do fancy evasive stuff to try and get away from them. Just make sure that they hit you right in the front, and you'll probably be fine. You'll take far less damage. The other thing you can do is, if you're worried when your ship is about to get revealed from a long distance, what you can actually do is you can, before that auger probe reaches your ship and gives vision of it, you can take an escort and have it go all ahead full, and as soon as that goes all ahead full, it'll be revealed, and all of the torpedoes will instantly launch at that, and that cooldown cycle means that that little escort there probably is going to be flying around being a nuisance and being a target for the automatic AI. So it'll probably take those torpedo hits before your big ships do, and if you're lucky, you can potentially even get some of the carriers to deploy their fighters at it, and then it can hit stealth and get out of there. This can save your main fleet from a huge amount of damage. The other thing that you can do with the Tau, again, they have got low reload speed for their fighters. So if you're up against the Tulku or you're up against a Custodian, you're not going to be up against a humongous number of Tau bomber waves. You're going to be up against less of them. Now, you can use this to two advantages. First of all, if you've got a fighter wave out as a defensive screen at the start of a conflict, that's going to be much more meaningful against Tau than it is against others, because they're going to launch that bomber wave. It's going to get suicided against your fighters, and it's going to take a full 60 seconds before they get another wave, minus anything from the protector or from the technical drones. Whereas if you're a carrier fleet for Chaos, or you've got Eldar carriers, or you've got even an Imperial battleship, Emperor-class battleship, you'll be able to bring out another fighter screen about 12 seconds faster. And that 12 seconds faster speed means that you could actually have another fighter screen out, block a second bomber wave, and then be able to do a bomber wave in between that while they're still charging up for their third bomber wave. So, and probably get another fighter screen out before another bomber wave even hits you. So you can actually negate a lot more of these guys. But one of the more important things is that Tau ships are actually kind of vulnerable to high-level fighters. High-level ordnance has that good chance to avoid death from a turret. So bombers, if they come in sufficient numbers and with high enough level, can penetrate through the defensive screen of a Tau player that is not deploying fighters. So if he tries to go fighter, bomber, to deal maximum damage with his carriers against you, you could actually deal pretty significant damage to that Tau player while still defending your ship more effectively, and he is defending his ship. And this means that against a good Tau player, that Tau player might have to do something like go fighter, bomber, fighter, and then just keep going fighter to avoid getting bombered by you throughout the rest of the match. If you have, like, say, a Chaos Styx fleet or something like that, then you can absolutely out-bomber a Tau fleet just through using that trick there. The faster reload on your ordnance is just much more important than the fact that the Tau inherently have better bomber waves than most other factions. The only ones that have better bomber waves are the Eldar, and that's only barely. So this is a great way to sort of mind game out a Tau player, and if he doesn't fall for it, if he's sort of a player that's just got an autocast, isn't really paying attention to the bombers, then you can actually deal a huge amount of damage to Tau ships using those bombers. I wouldn't recommend taking necessarily a carrier fleet if you're like Orcs against them, but you can also use this to your advantage just by having your fighters on autocast, so that you're constantly churning out new fighter screens to defend against their bombers. you will outpace the bomber waves coming out of the Tau, even if you have not got a very dedicated bomber fleet. And that will negate a lot of damage out of things like the Custodian. It'll negate a good chunk out of something like the Tulku as well, so it's a good way to negate damage for the Tau. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into a match, and we'll see how these guys tick. Alright, so here we are. We're up against AI as usual for these examples. So we're up against the Eldar in this particular case, and we got ourselves 2 Sasias, both of them with the repair drones. We've got ourselves automated up the gills. We've got ourselves a messenger, which is a fantastic little ship here against anything. Now, again, all our ships are basically set to fire directly straight forward, except for, of course, the messenger. I don't think it actually has broadside weapons, so I might as well set this to forward fire as well. But basically, the advantage that we got here is that we can just point our ships directly to the front of the Eldar ships, and we can point at them and have our ships, in this particular case, lock on target. Normally, I would prefer brace for impact, but against Eldar, it's actually quite a bit better to use lock on target. Just because you'll be able to disable their systems really, really quickly by using that. So here they come, popping out of the gas, so that's fun. So what exactly is it that's difficult about the Tau ships? Well, they'll right-click on you, and then they'll have their ships face their strong armor and strong weapons against you with a minimum of effort. And if you're forced to fight them and engage them in that sort of capacity where they're at their strongest, where you're firing at their front armor and they're able to fire all of their weapons at you, then obviously you're going to be in for a rough ride. The only reason why this is so notable with Tau is because of how much easier it is with front-firing weapons as compared to other types of weapons, where maneuvering and positioning means that you're not necessarily going to be able to use those sorts of traits to the greatest effect there. So, as we have got a level 1 fleet here, we are going to be without some things that we would normally want here.
Boarding enemy ship.
Alright, so got some boardings done there. This is a carrier ship, so I don't actually care about it too much when it is doing what it's doing here. Now, the Eldar ship is sort of coming around, but it's a carrier, so it's kind of weird situation here. We're going to go ahead and start facing all our stuff towards this ship here, because honestly, this little guy doesn't matter that much. So you can see that the Eldar is now trying to disengage a little bit, and he's kind of moving these Akonanites around, when he could actually just have his ships standing still, basically, doing their thing in a better way. I'm going to move this ship up, actually. I wanted to torpedo my own ships at all here. So, again, also, his ships are kind of following in the same arc, so that both of them are firing at the front of my ships, or kind of both firing at the back of my ships at the same time, rather than what you want to be doing in this particular case, which is having some of the ships firing from one side and some of the ships trying to get around the other side. Quite often these ships are coming around from the same angle, from the same side. Once you're down to one ship, obviously it's impossible to actually flank against the Tau, so it is important to have some numbers against them. But yeah, here we go. Easy point and click, using those repair drones, using keeping those repair hull actions up there to keep these ships very healthy constantly. So the small health pool is actually a little bit deceptive. Tau actually are quite good against the Eldar because of this, because the Eldar don't have burst damage anymore. They're incapable of running in and just immediately melting a ship at this point in time, and especially not without exposing themselves to a huge amount of fire. Yeah, so that's ultimately what the Tau are like. You'll probably, in this sort of case, you would really have no hope at all if you were using the standard carrier build for Eldar. If you're trying to run in with the carrier fleet, they're just going to have that messenger. These ships have decent chances as it is to destroy a couple of your level 1 fighters using the turrets. So Eldar is probably just a bad example, but even if that wasn't the case, you would want to use the ordnance stuff. They would be able to melt through the front of these ships because they're able to deal good damage to both the shields and to the hull with a mix of torpedoes and lance fire. You can actually go front to front against these guys with torpedoes and lance fire. It's just that if you're only against a low-level Tau player, once you're up against a high-level Tau player, they're going to have the ships capable to avoid the torpedoes, and at that point it's just the lance fire that you're firing into the fronts of these ships, which really does hamper those sort of other low-level Eldar fleets. So I could use the same recommendation if I'm using the orcs, but again, it would still be better if I could also, in addition to those torpedoes, get around behind the ship with another ship, ram it, and deal that decisive damage. This is one of the reasons why Eldar is so bad against Tau, is that they can't deal that decisive damage. They can't do a ram, they can't fire torpedoes. Like, the best case scenario ever is you, like, go around the side, you get a broadside with heavy guns into the flank of the ship, you're hitting them from the front with torpedoes, you hit them in the back with torpedoes, and then you charge them from both sides and just completely skewer the ship on both your orc ships. And if you can manage that, like, if you can start maneuvering your ships properly, there's not a ton that the Tau player could really realistically do. I mean, a really good Tau player would see what you're trying to get into position for that. He would actually boost the ship past your front ship that's in front of him, so that he's got enough distance between both your flanking ship and you, so that you sort of have to reset. But this gives you a chance to get a free broadside against this as he passes your ship that's in front of him, and you potentially try and track and ram him while he's doing that as well. So it's something that does have that trade-off, and then he has to spend a little bit of time spinning around. So all of that does mean that the Tau player, even then, is at a less favorable exchange. So you just have to maneuver your ships so that you've got one in front of them, one behind them. And the Eldar, again, was a bad example. Low-level Eldar do struggle, in my opinion, a little bit against Tau more than others, especially since there is a carrier meta for the Eldar right now, where they do not tend to take the pulsars and do not tend to take the torpedoes, both of which would be much more effective at first level. But such is the case sometimes. So anyway, that's our look at the Tau. Again, if you're a new level player against the Tau, look out for the front armor, look out for the strong front weapons, look out for the ones that have favors. Of course, if you're too low level and you see lots of favors, you know that you're up against a very high level Tau player, I always recommend to warp out. It preserves your fleets so that they gain some experience. You'll gain a tiny little bit of renown. You won't have to spend renown on ship repairs. You won't lose the ship experience, and you will gain a little bit less, of course, the Admiral experience, but the Admiral experience doesn't matter that much. What matters is that your ships gain experience, that you have high-level ships when you gain your Admiral experience, that you'll get into those higher-tier games with high-level ships. Otherwise, you'll end up in high-tier games with low-level ships and a points disadvantage, which is a really bad situation to be in. That happens when newer players get their ships exploded by higher-level players. That's sort of the thing that ends up happening to them. Very frustrating experience, and it's not really a great thing to have happen to you. So anyway, I hope you found this video informative. That's the last of our looks at all of the different factions. And of course, as always, I hope to see you guys all next time as I think about what we want to talk about next when we talk about Battlefleet Gothic.